before I begin my review, I wanted to actually send my condolences to the family and friends of professional wrestler Scott Hall. For those who don't know, Scott Hall was a wrestler in the 90s. He was mostly known in the WWF as Razor Ramon, and of course, he was known in WCW for being one of the co-founding members of the New World Order. So I wanted to take a moment of silence to remember Scott Hall. Alrighty. Now, of course, I decided for today's video, it's going to be more of a review of something that I've been really critical on, and I still maintain my opinion to this very day on what I think about the Nintendo Switch expansion pack. But because I've been thinking about doing a review for the channel lately, I thought, why not review the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack? Now, before you get all mad or whatever, I know some people may be mad because they saw if you see my rant video, you know I maintain my harsh criticism of the service. But I wanted to do a review for the channel, and don't worry guys, I didn't pay full price for this. I actually got a discount for this. I got a discount for the expansion pack. I got it for 32. It was $32, but I used eShop credits that I had, and I paid around like $20 for it. So I basically saved like $40 for this thing. But yeah, I wanted to review the Nintendo Switch expansion pack, and I'm only going to be reviewing N64. I'm not going to touch Sega Genesis games. So if you're wondering if I'm going to talk about Sega Genesis, I'll just say for right now, the Sega Genesis games are fine. I actually do not mind playing Sega Genesis games on the Switch. So all in all, I think the Sega Genesis games and the emulator itself is fine. So you won't see that. You're just going to see only N64. I'm going to play every game that you see in this collection. And I'm going to talk about my first impressions, my thoughts, how good the games run, how good the games play. And I'll get to my pros and cons. But I won't be reviewing. I won't be reviewing all the games. I'm going to be playing all the games, but I won't be reviewing them. I'll just be reviewing how good they play, if there's replayability, and etc. etc. Just basically seeing if the emulator itself may be worth it. So let's get started. So the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack has been one of the most controversial things that Nintendo has released for the past 5 years that the Nintendo Switch has been around. Of course, Nintendo's online service has not been the greatest and isn't really beloved by everybody who owns a Switch, including myself, because I'm really not a huge fan of the service, and I feel like Nintendo as a company can do better with the online. But when I heard that they were, of course, creating an expansion pack for the N64 Online, I remember my first thoughts were, are they obviously going to, are they going to make it affordable so that way like everyone can have it? And obviously with the inclusion of N64 games, I mean, as someone who loves the N64, I really got excited for it, and I really thought that, man, this would be awesome to have N64 games on the go with the Switch, because the N64 is my favorite system of all time, and I thought, oh shit, I could actually now play N64. However, the catch was that you'd have to pay $50 a year to play these games, and it just wasn't for me. And I still maintain that opinion to this day that that the pricing for this is still not really great, and I don't really like what they've been doing with it. But because I had a discount for it, I thought, okay, why not give my first try? So I'm going to talk about my first impressions. My first impressions from the emulator itself was decent enough. I had a decent time playing the games and seeing how good they ran and how good they played. I had a pretty decent time with it, of course. The first game I obviously popped in on the service was none other than Mario 64. And I really thought that the game itself was obviously, you know, like it's Mario 64. It's the same game that I grew up and play, so there really wasn't much that I was looking forward to. What I was looking forward to see how good it ran and how did it look from it being different than Super Mario 3D All Stars on the Switch. So as you can tell, Super Mario 64 still plays and looks the same as if you would know, obviously. But the game itself plays really good, plays fine. I think the only thing that I had trouble with when I came to playing this game for the first time was the controls. Now, as you can tell, I wanted to actually take a look at the controls for a moment, as you can see here. And you can see that the layout of the controls, at first when I saw the controller scheme, felt a little complicated because, as you can tell, the way the control layout is designed for the Switch controller, whether you're playing with the Joy-Cons or the Pro controller, is quite really weird. And not only that, but the one of the downsides between the emulator itself is that you could tell there's not really much to do in the settings, just to choose like which versions of the games you want to play, whether you want to play the North American or the European versions of games. I just don't really see why they didn't really add much. Where in the NES and SNES, I think the only options to have were like the screen filters, which was kind of lame, but this becomes more lame as hell too when you see the settings. So just letting you know, there really isn't much to do with the settings of each game. So the emulator itself runs pretty decent. Each game that I played on the service was pretty all right. There really wasn't a gap of games that didn't ran or didn't look good. At the beginning of when the service did first launch, there were problems with most games. A game like Mario Kart 64, which I'm currently playing right now, did have a lot of like frame rate issues, and it did also have sound issues too. But as I've been playing a lot of these games, I haven't really come across sound issues. Surprisingly, I haven't even came across any input lag. So what you're seeing right here is basically the game running smooth, and it looks really good. The textures themselves and everything, the graphics look pretty much the same, though. Some of the textures that you see here do look pretty. They do look like they actually are like, I would say probably like, I wouldn't say redesigned, but they look like they've been graphically they look really good. Sorry if I can't really talk right now because of the race, but yeah, if you get it here, you can tell that some of the, like, for example, the fences and the street pole signs, the trucks, the cars, the detail on the cars and everything look really good. Detail in some games look fine. There are some jagged edges in some games, but honestly, if you think about it, most N64 games will have jagged edges. But I feel like when you play N64 games emulated on other devices, especially PC and mobile, I feel like some of the textures look a bit better there. But it's kind of a shame that there are still some jagged edges on some N64 games. So I feel like the jagged edges don't really kill off the vibe of the game, but I wish they could have maybe put a little more detail in the game to make the jagged edges kind of go away. For example, if you play Mario 3D All Stars, the Mario 64 3D All Stars version, you could tell that they kind of did get rid of some of the jagged edges. And I realized too when I was playing Mario 64 that there actually were jagged edges on the King Bob-omb fight. So I was kind of disappointed to see that. It didn't really I didn't understand why there were still jagged edges left. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't really jagged edges doesn't bother me much, but when I think of playing old school games, especially old school Nintendo 64 games, and when they're being emulated on other devices, I expect at least some details to be a little bit cleaned up for some of the jagged edges that you see. And yeah. Now the frames per second in every game run smoothly at 30 frames per second, so each game that you play here runs at native 30 frames like it originally did on the original N64. So one of the games that I actually like that's pretty detail good on the emulator is Star Fox 64, which I'm actually playing right now. I think the detail on this game still looks really good. I do have this game on the Wii U Virtual Console, and it didn't look that bad there. Honestly, I thought it didn't look the best, but it still played fine. It still looked all right. But I think here it looks pretty good. As you're gonna see, the details on the ship, on obviously the water reflections in the Corneria level, the buildings. So it looks pretty decent here. So you're gonna get to see that right now. And another thing too that I realized is that when you're playing these games for the first time, you kind of when you're playing these games for the first time, you'll probably experience a little bit of awkwardness with the controller because, like I mentioned, it takes a little time to get used to the controls for most games. So when I played Mario 64, I was a little confused because I have 3D All Stars, so you would think that B would be like jumping and then like Y would be like to punch and kick. But some games like Star Fox 64 is not. I mean, obviously the controls aren't really that complicated, so I really don't have a hard time playing a game like this on the emulator, as you see here. So as you can tell, the reflection of the water, like look at the ship, look at the reflection. It looks really good. Now I feel like Star Fox 64 was not emulated bad by any means. I feel like the game still runs smoothly the same as it did on the original hardware. The game ran natively to 30 frames, so it's expected for this game to run at full 30. So as you can see, everything in the game, the textures, the graphics, the ships, the roads, the buildings, everything looks pretty good. And also, this game itself doesn't show any signs of input lag whatsoever. I was surprised when I played Star Fox 64. I was like, wow, this game runs really smooth. I mean, it actually runs really, really good. It's probably my favorite game to play on the service just because of how good it runs. So it definitely has to be one of my favorites to play here. And of course, some games like Ocarina of Time were able to fix some issues. For example, you could tell that when you're in the Kokiri Forest, some of the fog is pretty off now, and of course, some of the attention to detail has been improved in the game, which I've been really happy to hear because, as you know, Ocarina of Time was one of the most controversial games to be talked about or to even be shown on this service because, as you could tell at first when you saw the Darkling fight area, you could obviously tell the water reflection for that wasn't really that good. It almost looked like complete salt water, and it just, to me, I found that as an insult because, Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite games of all time in general, and not only that, but like, as someone who is a huge Zelda fan, I was really offended how they really showed off the detail for Ocarina of Time. But I'm happy to say that the detail on the fog and, of course, the water reflections and everything seems to be improving, of course. And I'm glad to hear that this game and obviously, like, other games that have problems are getting fixes. So that's definitely good to hear. Obviously, another question, too, is if the input lag is fixed on this game. I didn't really come across a lot of input lag. I may have came across, like, maybe a little bit, but but honestly, like, for me, like, I still prefer playing this game on the original hardware just because that's the way I played it, and obviously sometimes I'm not a huge fan of playing Ocarina of Time on emulators. I just prefer playing it on original hardware, or just play the remake on 3DS, obviously. But I'm happy to say that I'm definitely going to give this game more of a try on the service, especially as a huge Zelda nerd. I'm going to give this and Majora's Mask more of a go because it seems that they're improving with the emulation for some games. So definitely happy to report that Ocarina of Time is fully playably good, and And definitely, I think this is a game that you should definitely play if you're gonna play this. If you're gonna get this pack and you're gonna play N64 for the first time, you definitely want to give this game a try because, I mean, you won't regret it. This game is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm pretty sure everyone will say it's their favorite Zelda game. Not my favorite Zelda. My favorite Zelda is still Twilight Princess, but you still got to give this game credit where credit's due. So, what do I think of the selection of games so far? Well, the selection itself isn't really that bad. I think that could they have would have done better? Absolutely. I think the selection of games themselves are really well, to me, I think the selection of games that they did are great, but the total number of games they chose is pretty lackluster. So I really think that even though they chose great games for the system, and we do get games every month now, which is really cool, but it's only one game, and I wish Nintendo could maybe like. I feel like what they could do is probably like 1 month give NES games, 1 month give SNES games, and 1 month give N64 games. Like maybe 2 or 3 games. Like that would be pretty cool. And it's really been lackluster, and I'm not really a huge fan of that because I really don't like seeing that they're just being lazy and they just really just give us only like one game a month. I guess because as much as we hate their online service, they probably are just like, oh well, they only get one game a month because they don't like how harsh they critique our service. But I feel like that would be a smart idea, honestly, if they really started doing that, because I think that'd be a good strategy move for them, especially if they want to add more games to the service, which I don't see why not. I feel like they should do that kind of model where one month is NES, 1 month is SNES, 1 month is N64, and 1 month is Sega Genesis games. So it's really lackluster when it comes to 13 games, which isn't really, for me, like I'm not a huge fan of that. But I still think the games they chose are pretty good because, I mean, these games do have replayability, and honestly, games like Banjo-Kazooie, I mean, I can always go back and play and have a great time with, and I never have a bad time with these games on the Switch. The service itself does bring in some pretty good titles that some people have never heard of or never played. Sin of Punishment is a good example of a game that not a lot of people have heard of or played. And it's really one of my favorite Japanese games out there. It's a really good game. If you've never played this, I definitely recommend it. I actually have this game on my Wii U, and it's actually a really good game. It was only released in Japan, but it actually is a really good like arcade rail shooter. It's really, really, really good. And I have a great time playing this game because it just makes me feel like I'm actually playing an arcade rail shooter. It's just really good. And as you can tell, this game runs really smooth. It runs really fine. So there really isn't much to discuss about here. But you can tell that the game is really good. It really plays good, plays well. Graphics and the textures look really nice too. Looks a bit cleaner here actually, and I'm actually impressed with that. Because on the Wii U, it didn't really look that clear, but here, it looks pretty nice, and I'm actually a fan of that. While some games like Winback Covert Operations, which I've never even heard of in my life, are just pretty terrible, and they're just games that are just not for me only, just for me, are not even worth my time to play. And I'm not really a fan of the controls for this game too. It's a little awkward, and though the graphics themselves look pretty good for a game like this, and to see a game like this be on the N64 is pretty cool. I mean, the graphics themselves look really nice, and they look really clean. Though the controls themselves can be a little debated, because I'm not a huge fan of the control scheme for this game, and I really think it's a little complicated for a game like this to be played with the N64. And I'm pretty sure that this game was on other platforms and maybe it was better there, but a game like this for the N64, it's just not my cup of tea. The service itself is also a great way to also play multiplayer games with friends. So if you have, so of course you want to play old school classic four-player multiplayer games. There's games like that here. So you got games like Mario Kart, Mario Tennis, Star Fox. You also have, of course, Dr. Mario, which is insanely fun. And yeah, and I hope they also include more in the future, like Super Smash Brothers and maybe GoldenEye. But hopefully they include more in the future. So it's really nice to see the selection of games that they chose is pretty decent, and I think that's a great step right there. Is that they are selecting the pretty, obviously they're selecting the pretty obviously popular ones, which doesn't bother me because I mean these are games that we all grew up and love, and honestly these are games that are still fun to play to this very day. The only thing I could probably say that is probably most upsetting and it's understandable that there's only 13 games like I mentioned, so it's like it's understandable why you choose why you choose a great selection of games, but if it's only 13 games, it kind of doesn't make sense because when the NES and SNES apps when they first came out, you got a selection of a bunch of NES and SNES titles that you can play, whether it's first party Nintendo games or third party games. There's a selection of decent games out there, and obviously this is a pretty lame way to start, of course, a new emulator, in my opinion. But of course, there are games out there that are replayable, and to this day, they're still fun to play. Now, if you're wondering, is how is the online for these games? Well, I myself have not tested it out yet, so I can't really tell you my experience. But knowing Nintendo Switch Online, I could. I mean, and then again, there's videos of it out there. If you try to play online with friends, uh, your experience may differ, and it may not be as smooth and that good. So, just letting you know, if you try to play games online, it may not be that good. And yeah, it could probably depend on your connection too. But I think it's just Nintendo's online. Obviously, at the end of the day, even playing NES and SNES games, I remember at once was just weird because the connection itself wasn't that stable. But it was just, I think it was just in general the Switches online that just made that happen. So I feel like playing online is just not my thing here, but it's there if you want to try it. So definitely. Of course, there are games that I also expect to see on the service too in the future. Obviously, games like Pokemon Snap, games like Super Smash Brothers, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, Pokemon Puzzle League, Wave Race 64, definitely Diddy Kong Racing and Donkey Kong 64. I do expect to see more titles come to the future and really just be titles that are fun to enjoy for those who have never even played N64 games. I feel like the emulator itself is definitely good for those that have never experienced N64 in their lives and probably want to give it a try in a more simple way. But I think the game selection can be done better and hopefully can be obviously can obviously be more replayable because I feel like there's some titles that are replayable and there's titles that just are kind of forgettable. So I hope to see more games come to the service that makes the service feel more than just a couple of 13 games. I hope that they do add more eventually in the future. Unfortunately, there are some games that still suffer some stack fragments, as you see here. So, for example, when you play a game like F-Zero X, you could see there are some of the background layouts are trying to stretch itself. So, there's there's a lot of kind of some. I wouldn't say there's frame skipping, but there's a lot of like you can see some of the background effects kind of stretching itself out to stretch in and out. It's not really that pretty, but obviously when you play a game like F-Zero X, when you look at the textures itself, it looks really good. And this is probably the only game in the system, or actually in the service. Sorry about that. That runs at full 60 frames, which is pretty good, and it is playable here. Although I do find the controls maybe a little off in this version. Maybe it's just because I'm more used to playing this game on the original N64 than playing it here. But all in all, the games here are decent enough to play. Some games have resolved in zero input lag. Some still have it, and some not a lot. And then obviously, as you can tell, some of the frames in some of the games, as you can tell, some is good, some is bad, and just in general, some games do look, some games don't really age that well, of course. Like Win Back Covert Operations, which no idea why they chose that, and some games do. Obviously, most of the first-party Nintendo games that are here age still pretty good, like F-Zero X, Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, of course, um, Yoshi Story, Star Fox. Games like that still age pretty good and are still fun to play to this very day. So I don't ever hesitate going back and playing games here because I really love playing N64 games on my Switch. I don't usually play them all the time, but whenever I do, I always just chill and just have a great time with these games. So now that I showed you how the games run, how the games play, and what are my overall thoughts, I kind of want to discuss more about what I think the future of this service holds, and more importantly, what what I think Nintendo should do to improve this service. As I've mentioned it before at my RAN videos. But because this is a review, I'm not trying to sound off, not trying to sound negative. I'm trying to sound as great as I'm doing right now. And also, I gave this a fair chance, and I want to see if this thing was really, is it really worth the play right now? Do you need the Nintendo Switch online expansion pack right now as I'm speaking? So, couple things. I like the replayability of these games on the Switch, because do not get me wrong, there are many ways that you can play these games on other systems, emulators. And for myself, who collects Nintendo games, I have most of these games in my collection already. So there's not really, for me, it's not really about having these on my Switch just to have. It's just mostly for me, like, for me who, as much as I love Nintendo, there's things that I have disagreed with them as a company, and the expansion pack is one of those things that I have been heavily critical against when it comes to the Switch, because I love Nintendo and I love the Switch, but I am not a fan of the online service. But again, I'm not going to talk about how bad it is, because everyone knows how bad it is, but this, playing N64 on Switch is not the worst. It really isn't. I think the games themselves are playable. Some games run great. Some games have issues. I think the games themselves, the selection is fine. Like I mentioned, there's games that are still great to play. You obviously, all the first party Nintendo games still age well and still play great, like Mario 64, like Ocarina, like Mario Kart, like Star Fox, like F-Zero. Those games still infinitely age well to this very day. Yeah, graphic wise they may not age well, but still N64 games are still playable in my opinion in 2022. And yeah, there are some questionable games that I don't really understand why they're there, like this game right here, and I'm looking at you, because, yeah, I don't know why you're there. But anyway, but there are games that, like, I feel like there should still be more games that should be added, because having 13 games is pretty lackluster, and the fact you have to wait a month for another game to come out is just pretty bare bones. It kind of asks, it makes you think, why do you have this? Because there are many ways to play N64 just better than this, and I don't really think this is something that a lot of people should get into right away. I feel like if Nintendo had a lot of games on the service, and if they ran, I wouldn't say perfect, but at least they ran decent enough, like it runs really, really smooth, I feel like this could have been worth it, and I feel like the one thing that's holding off why people don't want to buy this is the pricing. The pricing is still the most controversial thing about the service, because as much as I want to love the service, but I know I fully don't, because there's things I have problems with it. the pricing is still terrible for a service that doesn't really work. And in my opinion, it's not enough for me to convince myself to get it because, like I mentioned, I can play N64 games and anytime I want to. If I have an original N64, I can emulate most of the games on my own if I ever, really want to. And the Switch, while it's great to have these games on the go, does it make you ask yourself, will you play these games often, a lot, every day? Maybe, or maybe not. You may be that gamer that may still love and play retro games. I love both retro and modern games. I love both, so I never get tired of playing either a retro game or a modern game. But I myself know that having games like this on the go is pretty damn good. But there also depends the list. Like I mentioned, I feel like if there was more games, like maybe get games like Super Smash Brothers, GoldenEye, get games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, Diddy Kong Racing, maybe get Blast Corps. I don't think they'd ever do it, but why don't you get WWF No Mercy? That was one of my favorite games on the N64 as well, so maybe get that one as well. But it's WWF and it's a license, so I don't see that. But maybe Pokemon Stadium, get that, or just get it. There's a bunch of great games on the N64 that you can get there. Wave Race, I don't know why Wave Race is not there. 1080 snowboarding, don't know why that's not there. I don't know why Donkey Kong 64 is not there. I know it's an underrated game. Some people like it, some people don't like it. It's kind of underrated or overrated. Some people think it's underrated or overrated. I think it's more of an underrated game. I don't think it's not my favorite Donkey Kong game, but it's still an underrated game. And I think there's definitely more to add on the service. And I know that, of course, they're giving out like DLCs for some games. Obviously, I know there's DLC for like Animal Crossing, and that's a game that not everybody has. I don't even own that game, so that DLC is bare bones to me. So it's not really something I care for. I guess the only thing that's interesting is the Mario Kart DLC that's going to come with it, but I plan to pay for that on my own too. So whatever, like, I don't care to renew this thing. I can just have the Mario Kart DLC on my own because it's not something that I really need. But as someone who wanted to do a review for the channel, I thought it would be interesting. So I think pros and cons. I have a list, but I'll probably list the pros and cons in the description. But I'll say the ones that I can remember by memory because I writ them on my phone, so I can't pull them here. So yeah, but one of the pros, I would say, the games run smooth at 30 frames natively because that's how most of them ran. F-Zero X is the exception though. That game runs at 60 frames, but sometimes the game stretches itself out, which I'm not a fan of because it would never do that and it didn't even do that on the Wii U Virtual Console version, so I don't know why it does it on the Switch, but maybe that issue gets resolved later because that's a game that I don't know why that has, but anyway. But obviously another pro would be that some games graphically have been updated well, like Ocarina of Time, as I showed you. There appears to be no fog. Obviously, the water reflections, it looks better now than it did originally because it did not look that good. So that's another. Input lag doesn't seem to be that big of a problem that much, so that's another thing that I could say that input lag is. There's hardly any input lag in most games, so there really isn't a big issue with that. So that seems to be resolved. And there is replayability in these games, like I mentioned. That's another pro right there. Cons. The cons for this, I think. I think the cons for me would be that the game list is short, like I mentioned, and the fact that there's honestly for me there really isn't much value to the list itself because even though these games are great, there really isn't much. And there's also the fact that the controls get some controls they take time to get used to, so I'm not really a huge fan of that. But some of the controls for the games, like the control scheme, it takes time to get used to, so I'm not really a fan of that. And And I'd say too that obviously like the pricing is still the most, is still terrible, and I don't really, I, even though I didn't pay full $50 for this pack, I still would not recommend paying full $60. If you do have a discount on your account for this pack, and if you can get it for a discount price, then I'd say sure. It's not that bad to check out, but it's not a perfect. It's not a perfect pack. It's kind of a bare bones for the moment, but I feel like Nintendo, they can do better with this, and I feel like they can improve. So, in my opinion, does the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, is there any value to it? I feel like in the future there probably will be. Here's how I can say Nintendo Switch Online pack will have value. I feel like Nintendo, what they can do, and maybe in the future they'll probably do it, is probably discount the price of the service, make it affordable up to $25 or $30 a year, which is not that bad of a price. I feel like if it was up to $25 or $30, maybe people would care. People would probably be like, okay, $25 $30 is not that bad, but the service itself could be better too, is another question. I feel like the servers need to be more improved, and I feel like, yes, I've said it before and I said it again, Nintendo needs to work with Microsoft to improve their servers, and I feel like if they can do that, it may not be as great as Microsoft's online, but it could definitely be a competitive service to where it could compete against PlayStation and Xbox's online. And the party chat and everything else should also be fixed. I know they just recently started to add achievements, which, hey Nintendo, you're welcome to 2006, by the way. But anyway, I feel like there is value to this expansion pack in the future. I feel like if later they decide to add GameCube or Game Boy Advance games and they lower the price down, I feel like this will get a lot of attention, and I feel like it's a good business strategy. Another good thing would be, if why don't you do like games for a month, for example, do NES, do SNES, do Sega Genesis, do N64, then later if you put GameCube and Game Boy Advance, do GameCube and Game Boy Advance a month. Do that. It's a good move, and I think that will make the retro catalog for the Nintendo Switch Online be better. And I think that there is value to it, but as of now, Nintendo Switch expansion pack, I can't really say that I love it, and I can't really say I hate it, but I can't say I like it either, because I don't really have an definitive answer of what I think. I just personally, in my opinion, I know, like, personally for me, it's not something that I love. It's not something that I care for. It's not something that I'm excited. But as someone that loves Nintendo, I know that there's many ways to play N64 and retro games on other systems. This isn't your last resort, because there's many ways to play it, obviously. So, but I understand they want to focus on bringing their legacy content to the Switch, which is not a bad idea. I think what would be amazing is that they made a Game Pass version of their legacy content. So you have a catalog of NES, Game Boy, SNES, Game Boy Color, N64. You have Game Boy Advance, GameCube, DS, Wii U, 3DS, etc. All their legacy games. And hell, why don't you include Virtual Boy there? Why don't you include Virtual Boy? But if they did like a Game Pass subscription model of their retro games that have their online free, like their subscription service could probably be like maybe $15 a year. That'd be pretty great. Maybe not $15 a year, but $15 a month, and then maybe like $20 a year. But I mean, I feel like they could do something like that. That's something that I would have preferred seeing, and maybe they may change their minds on that. But who knows? We'll have to wait and see. So yeah, guys, that was my my review, my very own review of the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. I know it wasn't a perfect review as a lot of people intended it to be, and I mean, hey, it's, for me personally, it's my very first review, and maybe later on I hope to do reviews of games and whatever I feel like doing, etc. later on. But for now, I just wanted to do a review on this, and I hope you actually found this video to be enjoyable and informative. And if you liked it, awesome. If you didn't, just give it a thumbs down. I mean, like or dislike the video, any support is great for the channel, and I appreciate people coming to the channel and sharing their own thoughts and opinions too in the comments down below. And I would like to hear, do you have the service? Do you like it? Or if you don't, what would you like to see be improved? What can be done to make the service better? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll keep in touch with the comments that I be receiving for any of my videos. So I just want to thank you guys for taking the time for watching my video. Means I've been getting 70 subscribers recently, so that's really cool. It really means a lot. So thank you guys for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching my videos. It means a lot. And I thank you for the support. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, guys.